Hello everyone! Welcome to Intro to Competitive Overwatch Fundamental Strategies. This video is intended for players who are starting to play competitive mode in Overwatch and want a solid foundation in the strategies they should be using. These strategies are just the fundamentals for you to build off of, but they'll be enough to give your team a big advantage over a disorganized team. If I use any terminology you're not familiar with, please check out my terminology video for helpful definitions. First, let's review the role of each hero. DPS heroes, who deal high damage per second, are the offense and defense heroes. Their role is to keep the enemy team suppressed so they can't push in, and to pick off enemies so your team can push in. Some DPS heroes are meant to stay with the group, like Soldier 76, while others are meant to flank around the enemies and harass them, like Tracer. Tank heroes are just the heroes officially listed as tanks. Their role is to absorb damage from the enemy team so that the rest of your team doesn't take damage and can still safely fight. Support heroes, or healers, are just the heroes officially listed as support. Their role is to keep their teammates alive and get them back in the fight. The most important thing a healer can do is stay alive, to keep healing their teammates, and to keep charging their ultimate ability. Now, onto team composition. Your team will play better with certain sets of heroes than with others. For instance, if your team is comprised of 6 DPS heroes, you're likely to lose. The competitive community is always changing their mind on what team compositions work best, both due to patches rebalancing heroes and due to subjective opinions. However, there are a few fundamental rules about team composition that you should follow to get started. First, your team should have 2 support heroes. If you only have 1 support, then you won't be able to heal your team quickly enough. If you have more than 2 support heroes, then your team won't be able to deal enough damage or have enough hit points to survive. You usually want one hero who can heal everyone at once to top off their health, and the only hero that can do this is Lucio. If you're attacking on an escort map, where the payload you're pushing heals everyone, then Lucio is less essential. Once you have a group healer, it's up to you who you pick for your other healer. Certain healers are currently considered stronger than other healers in the current meta, but I wouldn't worry about that. As long as you have 2 healers, you'll be fine. Next, your team should have at least 2 tanks. Since the main role of tanks is to absorb incoming damage, Reinhardt is a solid pick because of his 2000 hit point barrier field. Similarly, D.Va's defense matrix and Zarya's particle barrier can protect your team from incoming damage. In the current pro meta, teams often run 3 or even 4 tanks, but as long as you have at least 2 tanks, you'll be fine. Finally, your team should have at most 2 DPS heroes. If you're playing with random players online, you might find that everyone wants to play DPS heroes because they can be a lot of fun and are immediately gratifying. In this case, just try to make sure you don't have more than 2 DPS heroes, or else your team won't have enough healing or enough tanks. That being said, having 2 DPS heroes is totally fine. The one thing you need to keep in mind is that you should have at least 1 hit scan hero, such as McCree, Soldier 76, or even Ana. Hit scan heroes can be useful for picking off enemies at a distance, and are essential for countering Pharah, who otherwise can fly around safely. If you follow these guidelines, you're guaranteed to have a solid team composition that will work at least pretty well in most situations. That being said, feel free to switch up the heroes you play to get a feel for what works best for you. Sometimes, you'll want to switch heroes after a match has started. The main reason to switch is if you need to counter the enemy team's composition. For instance, if the enemy team has a Tracer that nobody on your team can kill, you might have a tank switch to Winston to take care of her. The main reason players don't switch heroes soon enough is because they don't want to lose their ult charge by switching. I think that playing an effective hero is more important than keeping your ult, so don't be afraid to switch heroes if the enemy team is countering your current hero, or if you need to counter an enemy hero. You might also switch to a fast hero to stall for overtime, which can be reasonable in that situation. An important part of competitive Overwatch is how you position and group up with your team. To be blunt, the group up voice line exists for good reason. Your team needs to position well in order to successfully defend, attack, and stay alive. In general, your team should stay grouped up and form a strong front line that the enemies can't get through. If someone on your team pushes in toward the enemies without the rest of your team and gets too far in to retreat, you say they're overextended. When an enemy is overextended, your team should punish that mistake and kill the player who's out of position. If both teams are evenly matched and your team picks off an enemy, you usually should push in while you have the advantage. You can sometimes peek around a corner to see where the enemies are or throw out some damage, but you need to be careful not to overextend. Overextending is a mistake tons of players make all the time, even experienced players sometimes. As simple as it sounds, you should consciously try to avoid dying. However, even more important than not dying is not dying alone. If your teammates spawn one after the other and push in individually, you say that your team is trickling in. This is the worst position to be in, since the enemy team will easily overpower each individual player on your team. If your team starts to trickle, you need to group up, even if that means giving up a substantial amount of ground. You'll never win a 3v6, so don't bother trying. Now that we've covered the fundamental high-level strategies in competitive Overwatch, let's talk a bit about more specific tactics you can use. When you're pushing in or holding with your team, you should all stay together. More specifically, you should all stay in an area that helps you move forward or prevents the enemies from moving forward. On maps that have multiple routes to attack or multiple areas to defend, you should coordinate with your team to agree where you're going ahead of time. For instance, at the start of the Temple of Anubis, you can attack through a room on the right, through the open area in the middle, or through a room on the left. As a general rule of thumb, you want to push in through a route that shields you from the enemies as you advance, and you want to defend from an area that has the high ground, gives you good visibility, and forces the enemies through a small choke point. As you build your ultimate ability, pay attention to which teammates almost have their ultimate ability ready. Most heroes benefit from coordinating their ult with a teammate's ult, such as Junkrat using his Riptire right after Zarya uses her Graviton Surge. At the very least, you should tell your teammates when you're about to use your ult to give them a heads up. Once you're accustomed to keeping track of your team's ultimates, you should start keeping track of your enemy's ultimates. While you can't see what charge an enemy has, you can keep track of when they last used their ultimate to get a good guess. For instance, if most players have charged up their ultimate, but an enemy Reaper hasn't used his ult yet, you should pay extra attention to your flanks and be ready for him to drop in. If you think an enemy is about to ult, tell your teammates. When you fight the enemy team or are preparing to push in, try to focus on killing the enemy healers first. Since most healers can heal their teammates so quickly and have ultimate abilities to keep them alive or even resurrect them, it's important to pick off the healers as soon as you can. One unique feature of Overwatch is the extensive overtime. If anyone on your team is near the objective and time's about to run out, you should definitely touch the point to get overtime. This is called stalling. The last topic in this video is calling shots, or shot calling, which refers to what you tell your teammates about what's happening in the game. Although effective communication is a large topic in its own right, I want to quickly emphasize that you should call out the events your teammates need to know about, and should not call out anything that won't affect your team's actions. For instance, if you see an enemy McCree ulting behind you, you should call out his position so your teammates know where to take cover. On the other hand, if the rest of your team just spawned and can't help you fight, don't bother calling out that you damaged an enemy, since they'll be fully healed by the time your team gets there anyway. Some good things to call out are where enemy ults are, when an enemy is lit or one-shot, if an enemy is flanking you, and when you're going to ult. That concludes the fundamental strategies you need to know to get started in competitive Overwatch. The full discussion about strategies and metas in Overwatch is ever-changing and never-ending, but it's all built on top of these fundamentals. Keep in mind the role of each hero, team composition, hero switching, positioning, tactics, and shot calling, and you'll be well on your way in competitive Overwatch. If you have any questions or disagree with any of this advice, please let me know in the comments. If you liked or disliked this video, please leave a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Finally, consider subscribing if you want to see more Overwatch content, and check out my videos on terminology and solo queuing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.